All right, class. So on Monday, I used two techniques to do a really cool, what's called a filter sweep. And I also used a reverse cymbal sound to create kind of a swooshing motion towards an important moment. And so I wanted to talk about those two things today and show you how to make them. Most commonly, this happens in music, and I can play you an example, an easy example of this. Let me just pull it up, music. Um, so these are some things that I created in advanced electronic music, actually, because we're talking about this right now. But just in general, the sound here, when we reach this moment called drop in this track, you're going to hear a build up, and two most specific things happen that really bring this to this moment. And again, happens in music, but we can do it in electronic music. We can do it in soundscapes too, to create the same sense of tension and drama as we resolve to a downbeat. So let's take a listen to this. Okay, so the first thing that happens, of course, is we have the classic what's called a filter sweep, all right? And we start with this sound at the beginning. If I solo it, it's using noise, white noise specifically in this case, and slowly filtering through it. So we start with a very high cut filter, and we slowly open it up over time using automation. So if we look at the automation of this track, you can see I have an automation here of a filter sweep that is slowly over time putting in all the frequencies, okay? And there are lots of different ways of doing this, but I'm going to use a specific technique. And then the other element that I talked about on Monday was using the reverse cymbal sound. Now, these are really readily available in sound packs and stuff, but I'm going to show you how to make one. Okay. So, and this is a classic sound that we can use to create this sense of, again, arrival. It's more of a direct arrival, like within 2 seconds, but it's contributed. So I'm using both of these at the same time. So making the filter sweep is not hard. So let's talk about how I do that. First of all, I'm going to use a software instrument, and I'm also going to use ES2 here, okay? So I'm going to create a track, and this is what I did in class. So with ES2, I'm going to open this up, and as I told you in class, ES2 is really complicated, and as I mentioned, one of the more unfriendly GUIs there is in Logic, and it's difficult to find things. But what I want to do is, I have 3 oscillators in this synth. I'm going to turn off number 2 and number 1. And I'm going to set the last one here down to noise, okay? Down to noise. And the other thing that I want to do is, as we talked about with synthesizers, the filter is right here. This is the filter. I'm going to turn this all the way up because right now, if I play a note, this will be cut off, okay? So there's several options now. I could actually just automate this cutoff, and that's actually what I did on Monday. As you might remember, I first needed to record some notes, and there's many ways of doing that. So, I could record one note or multiple notes. The more notes I record together, it'll be louder and thicker. So I can hit record now. Record. Okay, and as you can see, if we go to the MIDI here, just make sure this is quantized so it plays properly. And I'm going to drag these notes just over it. So yes, it's like a wall of sound, right? And it's going to just be a big nasty wall of noise. So anyways, in ES2, I can either use the filter here, or I can use a plugin to do the same thing. Or I can use the EQ to do the same thing, okay? So if I were to use this, all I would need to do is go over to my track, make sure automation is showed, go to touch, right? Because as soon as I touch this knob now, that parameter will pop up here, right? Touch the knob, there it is, MMF cutoff. So I'm gonna click in here now and make myself a nice little curve, okay? Now it depends on the music. Sometimes you wanna actually make a curve. So I might use the automation curve tool and go in here and make this more exponential. And this can kind of make it intensify quicker. I mean, it's slower, but then get really intense towards the end. It can do all kinds of things. So it really depends on the setting. If I'm trying to get a slow burn development, I might do this, and it just depends. So if we listen to this now, I should see, and I'm going to turn touch off, right, because I'm done with this. I should see that my filter sweep in the cutoff as this passes by. Okay, so the difference again is if I do a curve, it sounds more like this. And I'm also going to do this. It starts out too high, so I'm going to drag the bottom here down further to down, 2.6% is almost this weird. This is a percentage almost. It's basically 25%, right? So I want to start this pretty low and then get to full volume by the end here, or if not full volume. It's funny I say full volume though, because volume is an artifact of this, right? The more, when I put these filters back, these frequencies back in, it automatically brings out more volume, okay? So again, from the beginning. So anyways, this can be a really great way of creating some, a moment that's kind of important. I can also crank up the res here, and what the resonance does is right before the cutoff of the filter, it's going to add a peak. So I'm going to add a peak here, and that's going to emphasize the moment of cutoff. And so it should make it even more intense as we hear this. So let's hear this now with this res peak on it. Okay, so anyway, so that is, your classic filter sweep. A couple other things you might do. One thing that I tend to do is put reverb on this just to make it a little bit more soft. It's very intense, right? I want to kind of soften the edges a little bit, so I add some reverb in here just to make this a little bit less. So this might be something that you do at a specific moment in your project, right, to kind of create a build up to that moment. So a couple other ways of doing this, obviously, is that I can just not do this at all with it in here, but instead use the channel EQ, okay? So I put a channel EQ in here, I moved it to the top, right? And then basically, I would do the same thing. I would open the channel EQ, and this is basically exactly what's happening in ES2. I would cut out the low frequencies, okay? And I did that by turning on the high cut filter or the low pass filter. If I boost this like this, I'm doing exactly what I did in ES2, which is to add a resonant peak at the cutoff, all right? And then what I want to automate is this, right? This volume or this frequency band change. So I'm going to do the same thing again, where I'm going to turn on touch, and I'm going to touch that frequency right there, touch. And you can see it's switched now to high frequency, all right? So I'm going to go up here now and do the exact same thing with my automation. And I have to say too, you will notice that it really matters where the automation happens. The automation can be really... And notice too that this is in hertz instead of percentages or between 0 and 1. It just depends on the plugin what the values are going to be. So, but now my frequency, I'm going to get the same exact effect. In fact, it probably won't sound any different than what I just did. It's just using a different plugin. So it is a little different. It has that, it's that resonant peak in it that's a little more intense. Is causing that cool. You know, in some ways, to me, this sounds better. So it's another way of doing this. But you know, this could be really long, right? I could have something that's 8 bars long. Take all these notes and make them way longer. So this could be something that you do as a slow burn change, right, over time. So you're slowly introducing this white noise pass. Okay? So, you know, remember that it does get way louder, and so you may need to actually counter this with some volume. If the volume gets too intense, you could use a volume control automation and just do a little countering of that, right? Of that sound like this. So anyway, so that is that concept. Pretty basic. Let's talk now about using a reverse cymbal or snare, okay, or a reverse crash cymbal. So the easiest way of doing this actually is to, in Logic, it's totally self-sufficient. You don't need any recordings. You can use Ultrabeat and take a sample and reverse it, all right? So Ultrabeat is Logic's drum machine. I'm going to click on the Add button here, and I'm going to add Ultrabeat down here, the stereo version, okay? And that is Logic's drum machine, which I have to say has a lot to be desired. It's not great, but Logic has some new drum. It's funny, they haven't gotten rid of it. They've just slowly added new drum things that are way better. So this is Ultrabeat. Let me make this way bigger. So all I'm going to do here, first of all, this is mostly based on 3 things. We have up here the oscillator, which we can add to the sound. We have a noise producer, which literally produces white noise. And then the last thing down at the bottom is we have a sampler. So mostly a sampler, it actually does several things. We can do several things to make sound, but we're going to be focusing down here when this is set as sample, all right? So all I need to do is go up to the drum kits and grab a drum kit. Now I'm going to just grab something that I know has a good crash cymbal in it. This Ghost Town kit I use all the time. Okay. Now if you click on these notes, we're going to talk about drum writing too after the midterm. Every note has basically a sound on it, right? So, and there is no crash in this track. Let me see if I can find another one. Here's a crash. Okay, so that's a good sound to use. So you can see here, it says on that note, crash, right next to it. So this is a crash cymbal. So what I need to do actually is, you can see this crash cymbal down here at the bottom has been generated as an audio file, okay? So the only thing I need to use this specific note, which happens to be a C sharp, C sharp 1 probably, I think I'll have to find it, or 2. And I know that this note then is this sample, okay? And I have to highlight that whole line there. If I don't highlight this crash cymbal, what I'm seeing is actually the kick drum down here. So I have to go to crash and then click this little button right next to it. And it's going to reverse it, okay? So now I should get this sound, right? And then I just use that as a MIDI note, enter the MIDI note and play my reverse sound, right? So anyways, those are the 2 techniques of how I would do this. And there are other ways. You can do pitch ramping. There's all kinds of things that you can do to contribute to these type of developments to a downbeat. One thing to remember is that it often matters a lot that things are lined up exactly right, okay? So let me just show you another project real quick. Another build-up that I made for advanced electronic music. And here, so what I mean by that is that it often really matters where, you know, my last chord is here in this track, and I really want to make sure that all my elements come together at that moment, okay? So just remember that when you're building these. Notice too, I have another reverse cymbal in here, and this is kind of a secondary arrival at the middle here. Really important with your reverse cymbals when you use them is that you have to be really careful about where the apex or the transient of the track happens, and it needs to be set properly so that we really get the arrival of this reverse cymbal right on measure 9 in this case. And I notice I made a little adjustment. I guess it was a little bit off. But anyways, it's really important because then you don't want to kind of misalign that and have it not kind of arrive in the right time. So here's my track, and you'll hear it arriving. Hold on, let me fix something. I don't know why this Ultra Beat always turns on the sequencer, but let me turn it off. All right. Okay, so then obviously there would be music after that, but it's using a filter sweep is here. So this is my sweep. And in this case, I'm again using ES2. I'm instead though using Fat FX as my audio input, or sorry, as my filter. So this is the filter cutoff change that I'm making. And yeah, but it's exactly the same. It's really no different than using that or using the EQ or going into ES2 again and using the cutoff sweep, right? The cutoff filter. So anyways, just another example. Good luck with this, and I will be in class, of course, today.